The year was 2347, and humanity had finally reached the stars. After centuries of war and struggle on their small blue planet, humans had learned to travel between star systems. They built colonies on distant worlds. They created cities that floated in the darkness of space. They had become a spacefaring species, and they were proud of what they had achieved. When the message came from the Galactic Covenant, the entire human race celebrated. The Covenant was an alliance of 12 alien species that had existed for over 10,000 years. They controlled thousands of star systems. They had technology that humans could only dream about, and now they were offering humanity a place among them. Ambassador Daniel Carter was chosen to lead the human delegation. He was a tall man with hair and kind eyes. He had spent 30 years as a diplomat, solving conflicts and building bridges between nations on Earth. Now he would do the same between species. He was 52 years old, born in Chicago, and he believed deeply in the power of peaceful cooperation. Daniel had one daughter. Her name was Lily, and she was 7 years old. She had her mother's hair and her father's curious nature. Her mother had died 2 years ago from an illness that even the best doctors could not cure. Since then, Daniel and Lily had been inseparable. She was his whole world, the reason he smiled, the reason he kept going. The Covenant had made an unusual request. They wanted Lily to come with Daniel to their capital world. They said it would show trust between humans and the Covenant. They said children represented the future, and Lily's presence would symbolize the bright future ahead for both sides. Daniel was unsure at first, but the Covenant leaders insisted. They promised that Lily would be treated like royalty. They promised she would be safe. So Daniel took his daughter with him on the long journey to Prime, the Covenant's capital world. The planet was beautiful beyond words. It had 3 moons that glowed purple in the night sky. The cities were made of crystal and light. Millions of aliens from different species walked through streets that seemed to float above the ground. Lily held her father's hand tightly and looked at everything with wonder in her eyes. The welcome ceremony was grand. Thousands of aliens gathered to greet the first humans to visit their capital. High Counselor of the gave a speech about friendship and unity. There were a reptilian species with scales that shifted colors and 3 eyes that never seemed to blink. They had led the Covenant for over 2,000 years, smiled at Daniel and patted Lily on the head with his clawed hand. But behind that smile there was something cold, something calculating. They had studied humanity before making contact. They had watched human broadcasts and intercepted human communications. They had learned about human history, about the endless wars, the genocides, the destruction. But they had also seen something that worried them deeply. They saw a species that never gave up, a species that had been knocked down 1,000 times and had gotten up 1,001 times. They saw a species that was evolving faster than any they had encountered before. They saw humans as a threat. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. And they wanted to understand that threat before it grew too powerful. For 3 days, everything seemed perfect. Daniel attended meetings with Covenant leaders, discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Lily was given a room filled with toys from a dozen different worlds. Alien children came to play with her. She laughed and made friends without caring that they looked different from her. On the 3rd night, Daniel was called to an emergency meeting. One of the other Covenant species had a dispute that needed immediate resolution. Daniel kissed Lily on the forehead before he left. He told her to stay in her room and that he would be back soon. He told her he loved her. Those were the last words he would say to her for 16 terrible days. 2 hours after Daniel left, 4 soldiers entered Lily's room. They told her that her father had sent them. They told her they were going to take her somewhere fun. Lily trusted them because she was 7 years old and she had no reason not to trust. She took the hand of one of the soldiers and walked with them out of the room. They did not take her somewhere fun. They took her to a transport ship that flew for hours through the darkness of space. They took her to a moon that orbited Prime, a moon that did not appear on any official maps. They took her to a white building with no windows, filled with scientists and doctors who looked at her the way a person might look at an interesting insect. When Daniel returned to the room and found Lily gone, his heart stopped. He ran through the corridors calling her name. He grabbed Covenant officials and demanded to know where his daughter was. The answer he received made no sense. They told him that Lily had wandered into a restricted area and had accidentally activated an ancient transport gate. They told him she had been sent somewhere in uncharted space. They told him they were doing everything they could to find her. Daniel knew they were lying. He could see it in their eyes, but he had no proof, no evidence, no way to find the truth. He was alone on an alien world, surrounded by species that had existed before humans had learned to make fire. He was powerless. Back on the moon, in that windowless building, Lily Carter was strapped to a cold metal table. Machines beeped around her. Doctors with scales and 3 eyes prepared instruments that gleamed under harsh white lights. They wanted to understand what made humans so dangerous. They wanted to study human biology, human neurology, human pain responses. They wanted to know how much a human could endure. They chose to study a child because children were easier to control, because children could not fight back, because they believed that no one would ever find out. They were wrong. Lily cried for her father. She cried until her voice gave out. She did not understand why this was happening. She had done nothing wrong. She had trusted the aliens who smiled at her. And now she was alone in the dark with monsters who wore the faces of scientists. Somewhere across the stars, her father was tearing apart diplomatic channels trying to find her. And somewhere even further away, on a planet called Earth, humanity was about to learn what had happened to one of their children. When they did, the galaxy would burn. But Lily did not know that. All she knew was pain and fear and the desperate hope that someone would come to save her. She closed her eyes and thought of her father's face. She held on to that image like a lifeline in an ocean of suffering. She was only 7 years old, and her nightmare had just begun. 16 days passed and Daniel Carter was a shadow of the man he had been. He had not slept more than a few hours since Lily disappeared. His eyes were red and hollow. His hands shook constantly. He had sent hundreds of messages to Earth, begging for help, begging for answers, begging for anything. The Covenant continued to feed him lies. They sent search parties that found nothing. They offered sympathy that meant nothing. They waited for him to give up and go home. But Daniel Carter would never give up, not while his daughter was out there somewhere. Lieutenant Commander Brooks was the head of security at the human embassy on Prime. He was 41 years old, born in Virginia, and he had served in the Navy for 20 years before joining the Diplomatic Security Corps. He had a square jaw, quiet eyes, and a mind that never stopped analyzing. He had learned to trust his instincts in countless dangerous situations, and his instincts told him that the Covenant was hiding something terrible. Did not believe the story about the transport gate. He had studied the security footage from that night. He had noticed that the cameras near Lily's room had experienced a strange malfunction at exactly the time she disappeared. He had noticed that the 4 guards who were supposed to be on duty that night had been transferred off-world the very next morning. He had noticed too many small details that did not add up. So began to dig deeper. He reached out to contacts he had made among the lower species of the Covenant. These were races that had been conquered by the long ago, species that served as workers and servants and second-class citizens. They had no love for their masters, and some of them were willing to talk. One contact proved more valuable than all the others. His name was, and he was There were a species of empaths, beings who could sense the emotions of those around them. They had been conquered by the 300 years ago and had been used as servants ever since. Was young and brave, and he hated them with every fiber of his being. He had heard rumors about what happened to the human child. He wanted to help. Learned about the black site facilities that the Covenant operated in secret. These were places where experiments were conducted on living subjects, places where they studied other species to find weaknesses they could exploit, places where screams echoed through sterile corridors, and no one outside ever heard them. Had heard whispers that the human child had been taken to one such facility on a moon orbiting Prime. Needed proof. He needed something solid before he could act, helped him find it. Working through underground networks that they did not even know existed, obtained intercepted medical reports from the Black Site facility. The reports were clinical and cold. They described experiments performed on a human female child, age 7, designated as Subject 7H. They detailed studies of neural pathways and pain thresholds. They recorded observations about healing rates and stress responses. They noted that the subject had stopped screaming after the 5th day, but continued to show emotional distress through facial expressions and body movements. When read those reports, he felt something cold settle in his chest. He had seen terrible things in his life. He had fought in wars and witnessed atrocities, but this was something different. This was the deliberate torture of an innocent child by beings who claimed to be civilized. This was evil dressed in the language of science. Brought the reports to Daniel. He found the ambassador standing at the window of his quarters, staring out at the alien city with empty eyes. Did not want to show him what he had found. He knew it would break something inside the man, but Daniel had a right to know. Daniel needed to know. Daniel read the reports in silence. His face did not change. His hands did not shake. He simply read every word, looked at every data point, absorbed every detail of what was being done to his daughter. When he finished, he set the papers down carefully on the table. He stood very still for a long moment. Then he walked to the communication terminal in the corner of his room. He typed in a code that only a handful of people in the entire human government knew. He composed a message of just 12 words. He read it twice to make sure there were no mistakes. Then he pressed send. The message reached Earth in 14 minutes, carried by quantum-link communication arrays that spanned the vast distance between stars. It arrived at the desk of Admiral Laura Mitchell, commander of Earth's combined fleet, at exactly 300 hours local time. Laura was 58 years old, born in Texas, and she had commanded warships since she was 30. She had gray streaks in her dark hair and a reputation for being utterly ruthless when the situation demanded it. She read the message and felt her blood turn to ice. They have her, they are hurting her, send everything. Laura did not hesitate. She woke the president of Earth within minutes. She presented the evidence that had gathered. She requested full military authorization for immediate action. The president, a man named Henry who had 3 of his own, gave his approval without a moment of doubt. By 400 hours, the order was transmitted to every human military installation in known space. It was called Operation Reckoning. It authorized the use of any and all force necessary to rescue Lily Carter and to make the Covenant pay for what they had done. Ships that had been stationed at distant colonies began moving toward. Soldiers who had been on leave were recalled to duty. Factories that had been producing consumer goods switched to producing weapons of war. The entire machinery of human civilization began to turn toward a single purpose. The Covenant had made a terrible mistake. They had studied human history and seen a species of warriors, but they had not understood what that really meant. They had not understood that humans did not fight because they enjoyed it. Humans fought because they had things worth protecting, and there was nothing in the universe that humans protected more fiercely than their children. On the moon orbiting Prime, Lily Carter lay on her metal table and stared at the ceiling. She had stopped counting the days. She had stopped hopping for rescue. She had retreated into a place deep inside her mind where the pain could not reach her. She thought about her mother and wondered if she would see her again soon. She did not know that across the stars, humanity was coming for her. She did not know that her father's message had set in motion the greatest military operation in human history. She did not know that the monsters who hurt her would soon face a reckoning beyond their worst nightmares. But she would learn. Soon, the whole galaxy would learn what happened when humanity's children were threatened, and the lesson would be written in fire and blood and the silence of dead worlds. The human fleet arrived at 48 hours after Daniel sent his message. They came out of like wolves emerging from a dark forest. 47 ships, each one bristling with weapons, each one crewed by men and women who knew exactly why they were there. The battle cruiser Vengeance led the formation. She was the largest warship humanity had ever built, nearly 2 kilometers long, painted in the deep black of space with the flag of Earth emblazoned on her hull. Her captain was a 36-year-old man from Boston with steady hands and cold fury in his heart. He had a daughter back on Earth. Her name was Emma, and she was 6 years old. When he had read the mission briefing, when he had seen what they had done to Lily Carter, he had felt something dark awaken inside him. The Covenant detected the human fleet the moment it arrived. Within minutes, their own warships began to mobilize. High Counselor watched the sensor readings from his throne room and laughed. The humans had brought 47 ships. The Covenant had over 1,200 vessels in the defense fleet. This would not be a battle, it would be a slaughter. Ordered his admiral to destroy the human fleet and capture any survivors. He wanted to study more humans. He wanted to understand why they had come so far for just one child. It was a curiosity that would cost him everything. The two fleets met in the space between Prime and its largest moon. The Covenant ships were elegant and graceful, designed by species that had perfected space travel over. They moved like dancers, coordinated by tactical systems that had been refined through 1,000 wars. Their commanders were confident. They outnumbered the enemy by more than 20 to 1. But human ships were different. They were not elegant. They were not graceful. They were brutal machines of war, built by a species that had spent its entire existence fighting itself. Every system had backup systems. Every weapon was designed to cause maximum damage. Every hull was reinforced to take punishment that would destroy lesser vessels. Humans had learned long ago that the universe was not kind. They built their ships to survive in an unkind universe. Captain gave a single order as the enemy fleet approached. His voice was calm and steady over the communication channel. He said 4 words that would echo through galactic history. Make them remember us. The battle began. Human weapons opened fire first. Kinetic rounds the size of cars slammed into Covenant shields at velocities that approached a fraction of light speed. Missiles carrying fusion warheads screamed across the void in swarms of hundreds. Energy beams designed to cut through asteroid rock carved glowing lines through alien hulls. The Covenant returned fire. Their weapons were sophisticated, precise, designed to disable rather than destroy. They aimed for human engines, human weapons, human command centers. They expected the human ships to fall apart under their coordinated assault. The human ships did not fall apart. They kept coming. They took hits that should have been fatal and kept fighting. Their armor held. Their backup systems activated. Their crews worked with desperate efficiency to repair damage even as the battle raged around them. One by one, Covenant ships began to die. The Covenant had never faced an enemy like this. They had fought wars against species that surrendered when the odds turned against them. They had fought wars against species that valued their own survival above all else. They had never fought humans. Humans did not surrender. Humans did not retreat. When a human ship was too damaged to fight, her crew would aim her toward the nearest enemy vessel and accelerate until both ships became a single expanding cloud of debris. Human pilots ejected from dying fighters and crashed their damaged craft into enemy bridges. Human Marines in armored suits threw themselves across the void to board enemy vessels and fight hand-to-hand in corridors filled with smoke and fire. The battle lasted 11 hours. When it finally ended, 900 Covenant warships drifted as burning wreckage through the space around Prime. Humanity had lost 19 vessels. Every human who died that day died knowing exactly why they had come. Every human who survived would carry the memory of that battle for the rest of their lives. While the main fleet engaged the Covenant armada, A smaller operation was. A stealth shuttle carrying Brooks and 12 of his best soldiers slipped through the chaos of battle and landed on the moon where Lily was held. They moved through the facility like ghosts, killing guards silently, hacking security systems, following the map that had risked his life to provide. Found Lily in a white room at the center of the facility. She was strapped to a metal table, just as the reports had described. Tubes and wires ran from her small body to machines that beeped and hummed. Her eyes were open, but they seemed to look at nothing. She did not react when entered the room. She did not react when he cut the straps that held her down. Lifted her gently in his arms. She weighed almost nothing. She was so thin, so fragile, so broken. He wrapped her in a thermal blanket and carried her toward the exit while his soldiers cleared the path ahead. The scientists who had tortured Lily were still in the facility. They had tried to hide when the attack began. Soldiers found them in a storage room, cowering behind equipment cases. They begged for mercy. They claimed they were just following orders. They said they had families of their own. The soldiers looked at the child in his arms. They looked at the marks on her skin, the hollowness in her eyes, the damage that might never heal. Then they looked back at the scientists. There was no mercy given that day. The shuttle returned to the Vengeance as the last Covenant ships were being destroyed. The medical bay was ready. Dr. Price, a woman from Florida who had been healing soldiers for 20 years, took one look at Lily and felt tears running down her face. She had seen battlefield injuries. She had seen victims of violence, but she had never seen anything like this done to a child. For 37 hours, worked to save Lily's life. She repaired what could be repaired. She eased what could be eased. She held the girl's hand during the brief moments when Lily's eyes seemed to focus, when some spark of awareness returned to her shattered mind. When Daniel Carter arrived at the medical bay, he fell to his knees beside his daughter's bed. He did not speak. He did not cry. He simply took her small hand in his and held it as if he would never let go again. The battle was won. Lily was rescued, but the war was just beginning. And humanity had a message to deliver. The news of the battle spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species that had never heard of humans suddenly learned their name. Trading vessels carried stories of the impossible victory at. Diplomatic channels burned with demands for explanation, for negotiation, for understanding. But humanity was not interested in any of those things. Daniel Carter had not left his daughter's side since she was brought aboard the Vengeance. He sat in a chair next to her bed, holding her hand, watching her sleep. The doctors had done everything they could. Her body would heal in time. But her mind had been somewhere far away since the rescue, locked behind walls that trauma had built. Sometimes her eyes would open and she would look at Daniel without recognition. Sometimes she would whisper words that made no sense. Sometimes she would scream. On the fourth day after the battle, Lily finally spoke clearly. Daniel had been reading to her from a book she had loved as a younger child, a story about a princess who befriended a dragon. He did not know if she could hear him. He read anyway because he needed to do something, anything, to fight the helplessness that threatened to consume him. "Daddy." The word was soft and broken, but it was unmistakably his daughter's voice. Daniel looked up and saw Lily's eyes focused on his face. There was confusion there and fear and pain, but there was also recognition. "I'm here, sweetheart," Daniel whispered. "I'm here, you're safe now." "I knew you would come," Lily said. "I kept telling myself, Daddy will come, Daddy always comes." Daniel broke then. All the strength he had held onto through weeks of searching, through the horror of discovering what had been done, through the violence of the rescue, all of it crumbled. He wept like a child himself, clutching his daughter's hand, apologizing again and again for not protecting her, for not being there when she needed him. Lily squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. "It's okay, Daddy. You found me, you found me." But it was not okay. What had been done to Lily could never be okay. And as the hours passed, as Lily slowly began to speak about what she had experienced, Daniel felt his grief transform into something colder and harder. The men and women who had hurt his daughter were dead, but they had been following orders. They had been servants of a system that saw nothing wrong with torturing a child in the name of science. That system still existed. Its leaders still walked free. Daniel made a decision. The Covenant had requested negotiations. They wanted to discuss what had happened, to explain, to find a path toward peace. They were afraid now, after seeing what human ships could do, after watching 900 of their vessels die in a single battle. They wanted to talk. Daniel would give them something to talk about. He stood before a communication terminal on the bridge of the Vengeance. Captain had offered him this opportunity, had agreed that the ambassador should be the one to deliver humanity's response. Daniel was still wearing the same clothes he had worn for days. His face was unshaven. His eyes were red from crying and lack of sleep. He did not care how he looked. He cared only about making the Covenant understand what they had done. The holographic display activated, and Daniel found himself facing the assembled leadership of the Galactic Covenant. High Counselor sat at the center of the gathering, his three eyes fixed on the human with a mixture of contempt and newly born fear. Around him sat representatives of the other 11 member species, all of them watching, all of them waiting. Ambassador Carter began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. We deeply regret the misunderstanding that has occurred. The scientists who acted against your daughter were operating without authorization. They have been punished. We are prepared to offer compensation for your suffering and to welcome humanity back into the Covenant as... Stop, Daniel said. His voice was quiet, but something in it made fall silent. You took my daughter, Daniel continued. You tortured her. You treated her as a specimen, as an object for study. She is 7 years old. She trusted your people because she was taught that aliens could be friends, and you strapped her to a table and hurt her in ways that will haunt her for the rest of her life. As I said, those responsible have been. You are responsible, Daniel interrupted. This happened in your facility, run by your scientists, protected by your soldiers. You ordered it or you allowed it. Either way, the guilt is yours. Scales shifted colors, displaying anger he could not hide. You dare to lecture us. You, a species that has existed for barely a heartbeat compared to our history. You are children playing at civilization. You should be grateful we even acknowledged your existence. Daniel did not react to the insult. He had no anger left to spare for words. All of his anger was focused on what he was about to say. Humanity has a message for the Covenant. You have two choices. The first is total and unconditional surrender. Every individual involved in my daughter's torture will be handed over to human custody, including those who gave the orders. The leadership will step down from the Covenant. You will pay whatever reparations we demand. You will submit to oversight to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. And you will never threaten humanity or any of our allies for as long as your species exists. Laughed. It was a harsh, hissing sound that echoed through the communication channel. And if we refuse this absurd demand? Behind Daniel, the main activated. It showed the mobilization of Earth's full military strength. Thousands of warships gathering at staging points across human space. Troop transports loading with millions of soldiers. Orbital factories working around the clock to produce weapons and ammunition. Colony worlds converting their economies entirely to war production. If you refuse, Daniel said, we will burn your worlds until nothing remains. Every colony, every station, every ship that flies the flag. We will hunt your species across the galaxy until the word is nothing but a warning to future civilizations about what happens when you harm our children. You would commit genocide over one child? Asked. His laughter had faded. The fear was back in his eyes. Daniel leaned closer to the camera. His voice dropped to barely more than a whisper, but every being in that council chamber heard him clearly. She is not just one child, she is our child. All of humanity's children are our children. We protect them. We fight for them. We die for them. And when someone hurts them, we make sure it never happens again. You will learn what that means, counselor. One way or another, you will learn." The transmission ended. Sat in silence for a long moment. The other council members looked at him, waiting for guidance, waiting for leadership. Finally, he spoke. "They are bluffing," he said. "No species would go to war over a single child. They are trying to intimidate us. We will show them that the Covenant does not bow to threats." He gave the order to mobilize every warship the Covenant possessed. He called upon all member species to contribute their military forces. He prepared for total war against humanity. It was the last mistake they would ever make. The war lasted 3 years. When it finally ended, the species had been reduced to a fraction of what they once were. There was a wasteland. Their colonies were silent graveyards. Their fleet was scattered debris drifting through dead star systems. Historians would later call it the most one-sided conflict in galactic history, but those who fought in it knew better. It was not a war. It was a punishment. Admiral Laura Mitchell commanded the campaign personally. She had left her comfortable office on Earth and taken up residence on the bridge of the dreadnought Retribution, the and most powerful ship in the human fleet. From there, she directed the movements of over 6,000 warships and the actions of 12 million soldiers. She slept 4 hours a night and spent her waking hours studying maps, reviewing reports, and planning the systematic destruction of everything they had built. The Covenant had believed that their numbers would overwhelm the human forces. They had 12 species contributing ships and soldiers. They had thousands of years of military tradition. They had technology that humans had never seen before. But they did not have what humans had. Humans had rage. Every soldier in the human military knew why they were fighting. They had seen the images of Lily Carter on that metal table. They had read the medical reports describing what had been done to her. They had looked at their own children, their nieces and nephews, the young people they had sworn to protect, and they had imagined them in Lily's place. That imagination had transformed ordinary men and women into something terrifying. They did not fight for glory or territory or wealth. They fought because the enemy had committed an unforgivable sin. The campaign began with the outer colonies. Human fleets swept through space like a storm, destroying military installations and capturing resource facilities. They did not target civilians. They were not monsters, but they showed no mercy to anyone who wore a uniform or carried a weapon. Surrender was accepted from those who asked for it, but fewer and fewer chose to surrender as the war continued. They had heard stories of what humans did to prisoners. Most of those stories were false, but they believed them because they would have done such things themselves. One by one, the subject species of the Covenant began to abandon the war. They were the first to defect. They had suffered under rule for centuries and they saw in humanity a chance for freedom. Others followed, including species that had been conquered so long ago that they barely remembered what independence felt like. By the second year of the war, humanity was not fighting alone. They were leading a coalition of the oppressed against their former masters. The young who had helped rescue Lily became a symbol of this alliance. He traveled with the human fleet, serving as a translator and advisor. He visited Lily during her recovery, and they formed a friendship that seemed impossible between two such different beings. Lily called him her brother from the stars, called her the bravest person he had ever known. Lily's recovery was slow but steady. Dr. Price had warned Daniel that some wounds might never fully heal. The physical scars were fading, but the memories remained. Lily had nightmares. She was afraid of being alone. She flinched at sudden sounds and avoided anyone who reminded her of the scientists who had hurt her. But she was also stronger than anyone had expected. She insisted on following the news of the war. She wanted to know that the people who hurt her were facing justice. The final assault on the came in the third year. The planet was surrounded by defensive platforms and protected by the last remnants of the fleet. High Counselor had retreated there after losing battle after battle across his empire. He still believed he could negotiate. He still believed that humanity would eventually grow tired of war, and accept some form of compromise. He was wrong. The battle lasted 6 days. Human and allied ships pounded the planetary defenses until nothing remained. Drop pods carrying soldiers fell through the atmosphere like rain. Fighting raged through the streets of the capital city, through government buildings and military bunkers, through tunnels deep beneath the surface. Brooks led the team that captured. The former counselor was hiding in a reinforced shelter beneath his palace, surrounded by his most loyal guards. The guards fought to the death. Did not. When entered the shelter and pointed a weapon at his head, the great leader of the fell to his knees and begged for his life. "Please," whimpered. "It was not my decision alone. Others were responsible. I can give you their names. I can help you find them. Please spare me." Looked at the creature that had ordered the torture of a child. He thought about pulling the trigger right there. It would have been easy. It would have been satisfying. But it was not his decision to make. "You will stand trial," said. "Everyone will know what you did, and then you will face justice." The trial was broadcast across the galaxy. The evidence was presented in full. Medical reports, surveillance footage, testimonies from who had worked in the facility where Lily was held. Species that had never known what they did in their secret facilities learned the truth. The outrage was universal. Was found guilty of crimes against sentient beings. He was executed by a firing squad made up of volunteers from every species that had suffered under rule. He died on a bright morning, facing a row of soldiers who felt no pity and no regret. In the aftermath, humanity did not seek to rule the galaxy. They had no interest in becoming the next oppressors. Instead, they worked with the liberated species to create something new. They called it the New Compact, an alliance built on principles of equality, protection, and justice. Article 1 of its founding document was simple and clear. The children of any member species shall be protected by all. Lily Carter grew up to become the first human ambassador to the New Compact. The scars on her body faded with time, though they never disappeared completely. The scars on her soul healed more slowly, but they healed. She dedicated her life to ensuring that no child would ever suffer what she had suffered. She became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the darkest experiences could be transformed into something meaningful. Decades later, a journalist asked Admiral Laura Mitchell if the complete destruction of the military had been justified. If the 3 years of war, the millions of casualties, the burning of worlds had been proportionate to the crime of hurting one child. Laura was old by then, her hair fully gray, her face lined with the weight of everything she had done. She thought about the question for a long moment. Then she answered, "They touched our child. They are lucky we left their planet intact enough to remember them by." The galaxy learned a lesson in those years that would never be forgotten. Humanity was not the strongest species in the cosmos. They were not the most advanced or the most ancient, but they were the most protective. They loved their children with a ferocity that burned hotter than any star. And anyone who threatened those children would face the full and unstoppable wrath of a species born from struggle, forged in war, and bound by a love that knew no limits. The Had called it excessive. Humanity called it justice. And the stars themselves remembered.